You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Hello again, everyone. This is John Eichberger with the Fuels Institute NACS. Welcome to Convenience Matters. I'm joined here by my co-host,
Donovan Woods. Also happy to be here, and we have a great guest this morning, John. I'm looking forward to speaking to her.
We're going to be talking to Jessica Caldwell with Edmunds.com. We're going to be talking about the auto industry, where we're going in the market. Edmunds is probably the leading entity out there analyzing the market for vehicle sales, so we're looking forward to that. Jessica, thank you very much for joining us on Convenience Matters.
Yes, thank you for having me, guys.
And we're excited to have the conversation, and we have been spending all of our time looking at the automotive industry these days, and there's so much going on. I mean, you guys must be absolutely crazy over there these days.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely different layers to this story, and I think just the constant change, and I think the change that we'll see in the next decade as we move toward electrification and automation and, mobility switches up, I think there'll be even more. So I really think the next 10 years will probably be the most transformative period since the auto industry inception.
So for those of those listening to the program today, can you kind of give a little more background in terms of what Edmunds does? You guys are much more than just a consumer web resource for vehicles, right?
No, yes, exactly. We, not only do we, have pricing and all that kind of stuff with inventory, but we also have a, big editorial staff who goes out and tests the cars, drive the cars. We have forums where people talk about, the cars that they own. So you have questions with issues you could be having. We kind of cover pretty much car ownership from A to Z.
So with the all the discussion, and one of the things that I talk about a lot on the road, and people ask me, I've been several conferences in the last year, and every single person asks me, so John, are EVs taking over right now? Because they read all the headlines and stuff. So from what you're looking at, what are the big trends you're seeing? Are the headlines that electric vehicles are rushing to take over the market? Do you see that happening now, in the long term, short term? What is really kind of the undercurrent that's driving the market direction?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's definitely picking up some speed. It's been a bit of a slow slog over the past few years. In terms of when you see what's out there in the media, I think definitely EVs, particularly Tesla, gets a lot more coverage than the market it really represents. I mean, if we look at last year, hybrids, EVs, plug-ins in 2017 were, about 3% of the market. We expect that certainly to take off in 2018 as we see new entries coming in. The new Nissan Leaf will have a full year of 50-state Bolt sales from Chevrolet. And, of course, the car that everyone's talking about is the Model 3. So I think this will be a real pivotal year for battery electrics. I think that if you look at all plug-in vehicles, they may outsell hybrid vehicles, or they're certainly on track to do so in the latter part of the year. So I think this could be kind of the turning point. I don't think it's ready to quite take over yet, but I think it's more so the year that things start to get real for electric vehicles, and people may start looking at them more seriously than they've had in the past, rather than something that was just kind of interesting, beyond the folks that are hardcore into this type of technology.
And Jessica, just to give our audience a little more background on you and when we first met, and just to help them also understand that you know what you're talking about, we met Jessica back in 2014 in Newport Beach, one of our first conferences. And Jessica, the reason I remember you so vividly, I walked by you and your laptop screen, I think you had just dropped it, and the entire screen was cracked. I mean, it was like in pieces. And I thought to myself, she's not going to use that the entire conference. And you used it the entire conference. You took notes. I'm like, that individual right there is serious about what she's doing. So I appreciate you taking the time for this. And I always had that memory, and I wanted to share that with you. But you mentioned the word pivotal in terms of EVs this year. I've heard that term for probably the last 3 years. What does your definition of pivotal in terms of what does it actually look like? Is it going to be a big jump, or just there's more marketing, we see more commercials? What does it mean to you?
I mean, I think it's going to take a big product jump, and it feels like not only in the United States, but in other countries as well, as we look at infrastructure going. I mean, EVs definitely, green cars, I should say, have, had some steam in the past. I mean, they were, through 2012 and 2014, well over 3% market share. I mean, almost close to 4% in 2013. And then, if you look at 2015 and 16, they took a definite tumble. And so it was kind of like, do people really want these cars anymore? So I feel like folks kind of hesitated for some time, and they've had a bit of a rough patch. But it seems like, from a product standpoint, the vehicles are getting there. I think they're the vehicles are becoming a lot more desirable. It seems like there's a lot more types that you can get. It seems like automakers are kind of realizing that it's not just the compact egg that people are looking for. They want things that have a little bit more utility, a little bit larger, and I think that reflects Americans' taste. So I think, as cars get a little bit, more in that size frame, I think that they will continue to do better. But honestly, with the Tesla Model 3, production targets of 20,000 a month once it kind of gets up and running. I mean, of course, kind of who knows when that's going to happen, but that will completely change the market. I mean, because those type of volumes are just, I mean, they haven't really been seen since the heyday of the Toyota Prius. So that's why I think that this will be the year that we'll start to see some critical mass. So
let's think about the consumer element, because that's the thing I struggle with. I believe that EVs are becoming much more capable of satisfying consumer needs. They are becoming more cost effective. Eventually, they will be cost competitive with internal combustion engines without the government support. They'll have the range, they'll have the recharge times, all the things that disappear. Here's where I struggle. A lot of people talk about disruptive influences to the market, and they point to the smartphone, they point to the 13-year transition between horse and buggy to domination by automobiles. And my counter to that is, going from a horse and buggy to a car, or going from a PC flip phone to a smartphone, had immediate, tangible, compelling value to the consumer. Made life better, more convenient, more efficient. An electric vehicle is going to deliver somebody from point A to point B, just like an internal combustion engine, but it puts in place currently some less convenient elements. So what is going to be the driving force to get consumers to shift from what they've always done to this new model? Is it just going to be because eventually that's all that's going to be available? Is there a compelling value that I'm missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think price continues to be one. I mean, they're still heavily subsidized by the federal government and states. And I have seen studies in other markets, of course, perhaps more progressive and different topographies than the United States. But, once you get on price parity with the internal combustion engine, the vehicle sales become very similar. So I think that is certainly encouraging. But I think, like you had said, it's the infrastructure. It's honestly living your life slightly different than how you live it today, and that always seems like that is a big barrier to anything for people to do. But I do think moving forward, as automakers continue to introduce these type of vehicles, and I don't think that it's kind of an if. I think it's a when, as they made up with autonomy. A lot of consumers won't really have a choice, because that's kind of, where you see the market heading in terms of the larger picture. So, you kind of wonder if consumer acceptance is a part of the equation, but it's certainly not everything.
Jessica, I am a big car fan in terms of searching for cars. I don't actually go out and buy them that often. I'm very cheap. But growing up, Edmunds was one of my favorite sites to do my research, as well as your three-letter competitor that I won't mention. But there's a lot of competition now in terms of the consumer being able to do research, find out what they're going to buy, why they're going to buy, cost comparisons, things like that. From Edmunds' point of view, I consider you guys one of the best that's out there. What's the translation from people actually making these searches, doing the research on alternative fuel vehicles, and it actually translating into sales? And not specific numbers, but just, do you see that actually translating into what we actually see in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes, it certainly takes some time. I know there is definitely interest out there. Like people, they want to learn. They hear about these technologies. They see, Elon Musk sending a Tesla into outer space. That they want to kind of see what exactly this is. Not for at this point it maybe isn't for everybody in terms of if you live in a very rural area that's spread out, or if you live maybe in an apartment complex and your living situation is not that is a bit fluid and you don't have the charging access that that would work for you. But I think that there is some interest. So it may not be the car that you purchase this month, but it could be a car that you purchase down the road, maybe your second car or your third car from now, or maybe you buy it used at some point. So I do think that there is, some sort of correlation there. But I think at this point, for a lot of people's interest, they're kind of learning. I mean, we see massive spikes in Tesla models whenever something happens at SpaceX or Tesla, because I think people just want to know what is this about, and even if they're not buyers, at least they're interested. And I think that's a good step, as we move towards higher sales in this sector. Is people just have to get aware. That's step one. And then whether or not they purchase, that will come a little bit later. But I think awareness is kind of where this market is at this point.
Yeah, so we've always, we deal with a lot of consumer behavior experts to kind of understand that psyche, and obviously familiarity and comfort breeds interest. But you mentioned earlier that in 2013-14, green options had an increase in sales and demand, and it's tapered off. And you can equate that. That's when gasoline prices were $3.50, $3.75 nationwide. And they've been sitting in the $2.50 range now or lower for quite some time. And what we've seen is a drop-off in interest in alternatives. As you look at the data from what people are searching for, what the consumer interest seems to be, what seems to be the primary motivating factor when people are trying to consider which car to purchase or which car they're interested in?
Well, I mean, I think I get back to your first sentiment. I think it is what happened with, I think, green cars essentially is that the love for big cars kind of has taken over, and it is funny if you see gas prices start to go up a little bit from where they were, and it doesn't seem to really change people's minds because people have fallen in love with this compact, or I should say, all sizes crossover vehicle, and that's kind of what they want from a product side. So I feel as if that's kind of has taken everyone's fancy a bit, and with gas prices not being super low but not super high, and a lot of these crossovers have better fuel economy that they're getting. For a lot of people, that's good enough. So it seems like they're wanting to kind of opt for something, a little bit larger. And if it gets you, like what we've noticed is, for consumers, if it's better than what you had before, it's an improvement. Maybe you're not looking for the fuel efficiency of a Toyota Prius, but if you're getting, 5 miles per gallon better than your old car, you're kind of in the black at that point. So it's not necessarily people are looking at it from a holistic standpoint of every car in the auto industry, but from their own personal experience. And that's why I think kind of crossovers today that are car-based, are doing so well.
Donovan, that's kind of what my thinking has been. It's customers are going to look at what's the utility I need of my vehicle, which is why crossovers are so popular, because they don't need the 4x4 of an SUV, but they want the bigger space, the higher ride, and they want the more fuel-efficient features of a car. So you merge the two, basically an SUV and a sedan got together, had some offspring, and have the crossover utility vehicle, which is, 33% of the market these days. But then the next one comes into overall economics. And when we start looking at fuel prices not being in your face so bad the way they were several years ago, it comes down to what's the purchase price? What's the maintenance cost? What's the overall cost? And that seems to be the surveys we've seen in our research.
It is. And even if you take away something that's not on paper, a month ago at the DC Auto Show, I was interviewing different consumers that were there, just walked up to them, whether it was a family man or if it was someone a little bit more of a tree hugger style. I went to different segments, asked them, when you go to a dealership, how important is fuel efficiency to you when you're actually purchasing a car or looking for the type of car? Maybe 1 out of 5 said they even thought about it. Yeah. The majority of them, for example, a gentleman who had 3 children said, I don't have a choice. So I don't think about fuel efficiency. I think about how can I fit my family in this vehicle to get from point A to point B. The person who did pick the alternative vehicle was a particular person that wanted that car. It had nothing to do with anything else, but I want that car. So I think people think about fuel efficiency. They think reasonably, but really we don't. We kind of think with our hearts and what sometimes we actually do need.
And so that leads us back to the alternative fuel discussion, Jessica. If the auto companies we know are bringing more EVs and plug-ins to the market, that is absolutely guaranteed. And they're starting to bring more variety. So you can get a larger footprint car, a larger capacity. You can get your utility vehicle that the customer needs, the family needs, with an option of some sort of electrified powertrain. Tie that into what we're hearing in terms of internal combustion engine advancements. You have the Mazda Skyactiv X, the compression ignition gasoline engine coming out next year, the variable compression turbo ignition engine from Nissan and Infiniti models out now. You have all these different strategies, high octane optimized engines. When it comes down to it, do you anticipate consumers are going to have more choices that are just more efficient? Or are we going to see the market start to kind of coalesce around a couple strategies that will dominate the market in the long term?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a learning curve for the automakers. I think right now there probably are more type of engines that necessarily will shake out eventually, and I do think they're just trying to figure out what is going to be the right solution, because we know that there is a goal, and that's obviously good, increased fuel efficiency across the board, but kind of how do you get there, and what is the best solution for consumers? And I don't think anyone really has the answer for that. And if they do, it seems to change every few years, because I have heard many different things over the course of the past 10 years as it relates to this. But I think they're kind of at the testing point of, trying different things and seeing, essentially what sticks. But I think the common goal is obviously improvement. But how you get to that can be executed in many different ways.
I think the other side to all this is we're talking about personally owned vehicles, and we talk about what consumers want, but we're seeing more and more organizations start to advocate that the future transportation paradigm, if you will, is going to be dominated more by a ride-hailing, service-oriented market, maybe only in certain markets, subsets of markets, probably not nationwide, but in certain pockets. Are you guys seeing anything that indicates consumers might be kind of moving away from this desire to own a car to just, we have a sharing economy growing as it is. Why not just, use somebody else's vehicle and transportation option when I need it rather than having my own vehicle?
Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be very regional, especially starting out. I think it'll work in some areas, probably not. But I think we are starting to see some indicators that there is a impact that's happening with the rideshare market. I mean, if we look at daily rentals, so the cars that are bought by, your Enterprise, your Hertz, your Alamo, those type of purchasers, I mean, they were down in terms of absolute volume in 2017 as well as market share. So I think what that indicates is that, folks that are traveling, may not be looking for a rental car if they have access to a, car sharing system. And I think probably the other big thing out there that kind of gives you pause on this whole thing is what automakers are pushing out right now in the form of car subscriptions. So it's essentially you're kind of renting a car. You don't really own one, but you can kind of go through the line. And I think eventually what the goal is if you are, living in Los Angeles and you kind of go through, Cadillac has, one of the more well-known programs, and get whatever Cadillac you need. And let's say, one day you're traveling to Miami and you want a car there. Well, the subscription service would happen there as well. I think that's ultimately where they're trying to go. So that would also challenge the idea of individual vehicle ownership. But like I said before, I think, in some areas this seems more apt, whereas some areas, perhaps not. That's necessarily not the case. But I do think that we are starting to see a little bit of movement. It's hard to track, but it is something that you feel that's a bit on the horizon.
Yeah, Donovan, I think there's some forecasts out there saying, within 10 years, 95% of all miles traveled are going to be electric, autonomous ride-hailing.
Right.
But you've got pockets of populations that your F-150 driver, your pickup driver, your family with 4 kids, they're not going to sit around waiting for someone to come pick them up.
Your suburban husband who doesn't want to wait for his wife to get back from the store.
Not a chance.
Yeah. And I was thinking when you said the shared vehicles, John, does that mean that I can take your Wrangler home this weekend? Is that what you're saying? I can use that? No?
It depends on how strong you think you feel today.
Got it.
I mean, that's the other thing, because, we talk to groups, Jessica, about how do we address emissions, congestion, and some people say ride hailing. Well, only if we start sitting in cars together. If we get out of single occupant vehicles, and quite frankly, the American population doesn't like sharing personal space. And so I see a lot of generational shifts needing to take effect before we move out of this personal vehicle dominated market.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think, I look around. I have a pretty unforgiving commute in Los Angeles from they're a highly populated area. And the one nice thing about it is I'm in my car listening to whatever podcast or whatever radio station that I want to listen to. And it kind of is my own personal time, not having to deal with, colleagues or family or anything. And I think you think about this idea of now I'm sharing a ride to work with somebody who maybe works down the road for me. And, that calmness that I get to experience twice a day is suddenly gone, and now I'm just sitting in traffic, with somebody else, and I think that definitely is a cultural change. Specifically here in the United States, may not be such a barrier in other countries, and that's kind of why we have our cars, and some areas are not particularly fond of public transportation as much, is for that purpose.
Some behavioral experts have called that cocooning. It's the only place left in today's society where you can escape and legitimately say, I can't be bothered because I'm driving, I'm not texting, I'm not going to talk on the phone. You can actually isolate yourself, and you're right. If we're going to be forced into cars with each other, we may have some mood-altering drug sales go up in volume pretty quickly to keep people calm and rational.
Yeah, and people have different ways of how they like to commute. How some folks are really aggressive, and some like to sit back and sit in one lane. And I can only imagine the arguments that's going to break out amongst the passenger, in terms of, what's right and what's wrong.
Not
and,
good.
Like what route to take, and is the computerized route really the best route to take? It's just, it does seem like there's a lot of good benefits that will come out of it, but you do see some negative externalities as well.
So I guess as we start wrapping up time here, if you could kind of characterize where you see the market heading in the next 5 years, succinctly, how would you kind of describe what the market might look like over the next 5 years or so?
Well, I think that there probably is two hurdles, one small one, one large one. The first hurdle being the shift in consumer preferences towards larger vehicles. Like, how are automakers going to deal with that? How can you not necessarily count on the volume of Ford Fusions or Camrys that you're going to sell because the market doesn't necessarily want them as much anymore? Because that's really going to determine your future profitability, which I think is the larger hurdle, that you're going to have to start developing these, autonomous systems. And a lot of companies have already started, but it does seem like the next 5 years will lend itself to a lot more activity in this space. Your mobility solutions, electrification. So that is the bigger hurdle, but you have to put yourself in a place where you financially can support that, and that happens in the here and now of what you're selling. So that's why I think there'll be so much traditional transformation and then also the non-traditional transformation in the next 5 years that we'll see. How good companies weather that is really going to determine whether they'll still be in business, 20, 30 years from now, because it may not be the case for everyone that we know today.
Yeah, and there was an op-ed that Bob Lutz wrote a couple months ago where he's projecting that in 20 years, the legislation will be enacted to take the steering wheel out of our hands and basically prohibit humans from driving cars. And that's 20 years. I don't agree with that. Second of all, out of my cold, dead hands will they pull my steering wheel. But it's, you start thinking about these giants of industry seeing a sea change in how the market's going to be structured in a short time frame. It's an eye-opener. It makes you really think, are we really heading that direction, or are the 120-year infrastructure and mindset of the population going to hold on longer than other people expect? It'll be fun. It's going to be fun from an observational standpoint to watch.
Yeah, I think definitely. I kind of felt the same way as you, but in November, a few months ago, I had ridden in the GM Cruise Automation vehicle. So basically, this is a car that drives itself through the streets of San Francisco, and it is, it's not perfect, but it is amazing how much this vehicle can navigate through, cyclists, pedestrians, delivery trucks, and still get you from point A to point B. Like I said, it's definitely not perfect, but in terms of how long they've been working on the technology, which I know is not a long time in the grand scheme of things, is very amazing. So I think when you have a time horizon like 20 years, it seems like anything can really be possible at that point.
Yep.
Absolutely. And you mentioned autonomous technology, and I just have one quick question for you to wrap this up. I was at CES a few months ago, and I heard a lot about electric vehicles being tied to autonomous vehicles and fully autonomous vehicles. Do you see a time where that separation goes away and you hear more about just autonomous with internal combustion engines more often? Because we do right now kind of put them together, but do you see that having to separate and go towards more of a conventional engine?
Probably not. I know some companies have propagated hybrid, more of a hybrid solution, so there wouldn't be necessarily a down charging time. But I mean, I think as battery technology gets better, gets cheaper, it's hard to say when autonomy gets here, what is that battery electric vehicle going to look like? I imagine a lot better than it looks today. So I feel like they will go hand in hand. But for the amount of usage, it seems like companies want to get out of them. I've heard, 24 hours, ride shifts, whether or not they're picking up people or delivering goods or picking up, goods to deliver to people, the high utilization rates seem like it's going to make sense for some sort of electrification rather than an internal combustion engine.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking time with us today. If people want to learn more about what Edmunds is doing, where should they go to check that out?
Well, I think edmunds.com is always a good resource, and then also we do a lot of our analysis at the edmunds.com, and then it'd be like /industry center. So we kind of track the industry in terms of sales, in terms of future technology, in terms of loyalty, all those things at that place.
Well, again, thank you very much for joining us, and everybody out there, thank you for listening in to Convenience Matters. We'll see you next time.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in conjunction with Human Factor Media. For more information, visit convenience.org.